It's Monday, October 27th, 2025, and this is the week in review. The first week in review, in fact. If anybody's noticed, I've changed up how I post a little bit on this channel. I plan to post the week in review every Monday evening, and then on Thursdays, hopefully weekly, but perhaps bi weekly, I plan to present another piece that may or may not have to do with recent news. But I've been posting a lot more on the Liberty Chronicle as opposed to Impeach the State. So if you would please go to libcron, libchron.wordpress.com, and sign up for the newsletter there. I've been attempting to present a little bit more objective news analysis, and then the week in review will be a little bit more personalized, and whatever else may strike my fancy as news breaks. We will see how that goes. But I'm going to go back a little bit further than a week since it's the first week in review. But I want to start with the Pentagon memo requiring all of the journalists a sign stating that they can't report anything that's not approved, even if it's unclassified. And that's just like another step in this progression towards the destruction of transparency, the destruction of the concept of separation of powers, and various other principles that the United States government was founded upon. It's a bit insidious, I would say, even though it's right on the face, basically right in your face. What they're telling you is that you can't approve, you can't report anything that we say is you can't. So, I mean, it's basically an official propaganda puppet at that point. But it's insidious in the sense that they're whittling away at this through the guise of security. Then, when you couple that with the memo saying that Department of War employees must now seek permission before speaking to members of Congress in any official capacity. It's just another blow, right? They have two direct movements towards the destruction of transparency and oversight. Equally insidious in the sense that they're they're acting like this memo is like depoliticizing the military by separating them, but really what it's doing is inherently politicizing the military by silencing them in regards to communication, or at least stifling them in regards to communication with the civilian leadership in order to achieve, as he says, their legislative goals. So it's just inherently politicizing the military when the military is supposed to be neutral, though it is meant to be subordinate to, and follow the dictates of the civilian leadership. This is a bad order from the civilian leadership, right? In this sense, because it's reduction of oversight, reduction of transparency. It's inherently turning them into a political organ by saying you need to silence yourself in order for us to achieve our political goals. So it's just like this Cold War type mentality where everybody's a potential spy, and so on and so forth. So we need to circumvent these protocols that we've had in place for so long in order to ensure that there isn't a lack of oversight and things like that. Even though, of course, it doesn't always it doesn't really work necessarily that those were in place before, but now just to be right out in the open. The same as with the press memo. Media has been propaganda. The media has been propaganda. The media has been propaganda. So now what we've done is we've just made it an actual policy that the media is propaganda. So it's just mind blowing. Just interesting how their reaction to basically everything has been the wrong reaction. The reaction to the authoritarianism of the so-called left and the Marxists and the Democrats and everything is to just be authoritarians back, and that's the problem, right? That's the entire problem. You're just doing the same problematic things that you have criticized them for doing. The military is meant to be subordinate to the civilian leadership, and here they are putting putting a wall between the communications between the press and the people in the military and the government, and the civilian leadership and the military, so-called defense, now Department of War and the Pentagon. So it's very worrisome that they're attempting to erode this the transparency. The only reason for the one memo was that now they're saying that it has, even if it's unclassified, you can't report it, because it was always kind of given, obviously, that if it's classified, you need to get permission. Don't just start telling state secrets. I'm not sure I agree with that. It really depends on what the information is, obviously, because then you get into the problems of Edward Snowden being called a traitor for, telling us that the government was spying on us when the government shouldn't be doing that. So you can't be too rigid with that concept. But then again, you can't be too authoritarian in the other direction, which basically that's what that is, more or less the official propaganda priest memo. And then, of course, there were a bunch of individuals who signed up for that. So, I mean, how can you even really listen to anything that those guys say anymore? Because you know that it's all been filtered through the government officials. Then we also had Army counterintelligence getting the power to search and arrest off base before they had to involve local law enforcement. And now
I am here at AUSA. This is the Association of the U.S. Army, the annual meeting here in Washington, D.C. I was invited to a media roundtable with officials from the Army, from intelligence and counterintelligence. Most of them were from the Army Counterintelligence Command. And I just want to give you some of the highlights from this. What they say is that right now they have more than 200 investigations that they are working, 200. And they expect that things could change because of the National Defense Authorization Act, because they're expecting by the end of the year that Attorney General Cam Bondi will give them new authority based on that NDAA. It will allow them to empower the counterintelligence agents to now execute search warrants and make arrests and conduct searches before that to inform those arrests. Lieutenant General Anthony Hale, he's the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army for Intelligence, said at the roundtable, quote, most of the personnel that are under investigation live off of the installation. And before this, they would have to partner with the FBI or other law enforcement agencies. He said, quote, a lot of the cases that we have right now may not gain the interest of law enforcement agency because we haven't found the critical information that we need to make this a larger case. But once we get those authorities, we're able to do a search warrant. We may be able to get a device so that we can run forensics on a device that will help us answer questions in the investigation.
just another kind of blurring and destruction of the differences between domestic law enforcement and the military. Now, of course, they'll just say, like, well, we're only, our investigations start on base. But either way, who's going to get caught in that dragnet? Same thing with this whole problem with immigration. All these other innocent people are getting caught up in the heat of the moment, but everybody's making excuses for it because in the end, as Trump said, he who saves his country breaks no law, which is just total authoritarian gibberish. Considering the fact that they're all doing this under the guise of safety, it's just inherent hypocrisy, just the same way the Democrats did it under COVID and things. And when I bring up what these people are doing, like with the press corps and everything, the immediate response from these conservatives has been to just criticize Biden and to go back about what the Democrats did. I'm thinking that they're just assuming that I'm a Democrat or something because I'm opposed to what's going on, and obviously that's not the case. And so, yeah, I'll criticize that too, and I'll say, but Biden's not in power. Biden's not in office right now. Biden's not the one doing all this. So, live in the now, as a wise philosopher from Aurora said. Then, of course, we got this just absurdity going on in Venezuela and in the oceans with the boats in light of the fact that, the government's saying it's shut down. They keep repeating the government is shut down. What that basically means is, of course, programs for food assistance like SNAP and WIC are going to be halted because they can't find the money for that. But they're still blowing up boats in the Pacific Ocean. And speaking of that, it was so absurd. They actually captured two people from a boat, allegedly, and then they just let them go.
One of the interesting things is one of the recent explosions, a bunch of the people on the boats died, but two people survived. Did we detain them and check them for drugs or drug residue? Did we gather the evidence from the wreckage and then prosecute them? No, we just said, oh, well, we're going to send you back to your country. So I really think that you cannot have a policy where you just allege that someone is guilty of something and then kill them.
So they're dangerous enough to blow them out of the water, but then when they survive, they don't bring them in and they don't charge them with anything officially. And then, of course, now Trump is talking about striking inside of Venezuelan territory, which, I mean, at that point, that's just an act of war. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it a military operation or whatever you're going to call it without getting needing congressional approval. But that's even going, like, first it was international waters, now it's out in the Pacific, and first in the Caribbean, now it's in the Pacific, sending boats out towards Venezuela, and you're saying you're going to strike inside Venezuelan territory. So basically, this whole anti-war thing, it's interesting because over there in the Middle East and whatnot, he can play anti-war and peace and all this other thing, and then down here he's escalating the military action under different terms, right? Just using different words, and of course this one is to protect us. These guys are way closer. They're shipping in drugs. Of course, fentanyl. Apparently, I looked it up, and fentanyl was killed like 80,000 people, and of course, tobacco kills almost 500,000 tobacco-related illness every year. I'm not saying to ban tobacco, but I'm not saying to ban fentanyl either. We need to liberalize those markets for various philosophical, ethical, and economic reasons. It just shows the blatant hypocrisy, right, in so many ways. The government's shutting down, doesn't have money to feed people and their babies, but has money to drop bombs in the ocean, has money to engage with deals with Argentina, which I think Venezuela and Argentina are linked down there. I called out in that video a while back that, like a long time ago, over a year ago for sure, and even right since the beginning, but I just didn't make a video about it right away. But it was obvious that that guy seems like an IMF shill. He was too obsessed with the dollar. It was kind of obvious, right? That I mean, no classical liberal even would have been that obsessed with fiat, not, and let alone that of another state. I understand his economic trade-offs argument, where the dollar is more valuable, it would be good for our economy, but you should be talking about gold. You should be talking about free trade. We're trying to abolish the Federal Reserve, right? So in a sense, giving liquidity and giving some more tax subjects to milk for the IMF for the US dollar, that's kind of working against our interests over here. So, and also to be against government bailouts, but then to bail out a failing state, we don't care if the government goes broke. So what's he even talking about down there? But I think that my view of that is his infatuation with the dollar was an indicator that they're concerned about BRICS. Argentina being the second largest economy in South America, it seemed like they were setting that up for some kind of dollar deal so that the IMF would not lose its so-called investment. Really, it's more just kind of like perpetual debt that they seem to want to keep these countries in. So whether Millet understands that fully or not, or he's just getting led along, strung along, I'm not sure. He probably understands it. I'm not sure an anarchist politician would win and get the nod from Donald Trump. Anarchist politician gets the nod from Donald Trump. Meanwhile, they're going on and on about the anarchists in the streets doing bad things. So, it's just all nonsense propaganda. Then, of course, a little bit throwback, I guess. News travels fast and gets old quick, but I'm sure we all saw the video of the guy following the troops around playing the Imperial March. Apparently, what we didn't see was he got arrested, detained anyway. He was detained for about 20 minutes, and now he's suing the feds, DC. He's suing with the help of ACLU. On the claim of violation of First and Fourth Amendment rights, which, right, it's interesting because it almost looks worse that they didn't arrest him for anything, because at that point, what was the reason for your detaining me? Like, that is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights if you detain me without reasonable suspicion. My concern is that they're going to make a claim that it's harassment to follow him around playing music. I was thinking first maybe they'd make the argument that you're like inherently interfering because you're distracting them from crimes that they might be able to stop, but technically they're not supposed to be participating in domestic law enforcement, so I'm not sure how they can make that argument. Like, I heard that guy say he was an illegal alien, but I couldn't hear it because, I could have heard it, but I couldn't hear it because this guy was playing Imperial March. So, that's a stretch. That's more of a stretch than saying it's harassment. Probably most especially if those guys were off duty. So we'll see how that plays out, because detainment is the threat of force, right? If at that point where you have been handcuffed and you have been actually detained and the police have said, yes, you are being detained, at that point, if you try to run, then they are authorized under their codes to do whatever force, regardless of what, the actual so-called offense was. So to threaten the initiation of force for that, I would say, is definitely a violation of persons' rights. Following these guys around, especially when they're walking around in their fatigues, seems to me like that would be freedom of expression. There's the Jolly Ginger who's down there. He was down there broadcasting that General Milley I believe it was speech through a loudspeaker. So
To have served as the 20th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
So 8 hours ago, we started playing this speech for the National Guard,
up here on this stage.
and now, 8 hours later, we're still playing it. We've been playing it all day long. It's General Milley's speech reminding our America's military what we took an oath to.
We don't take an oath to a country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution.
if that's okay, standing right in front of where these guys are guarding, I'm not sure why this wouldn't be okay. And right, just the escalation that's going on in Venezuela is worrisome. Talking about striking inside the territory, striking cocaine plants, sending warships down there, battle cruisers or carriers rather. Definitely concerning. Oh, and just another little piece of strange kind of just bizarro world type hypocrisy. The piece I covered, the president's two treasuries. It's just the audacity of this guy. It's so wild because in most cases you gotta agree with him. It's just he's such a hypocrite and so inconsistent. Like, who would ever say that if the Department of Justice was harassing you, you shouldn't be able to sue for damages, right? And I'm not saying that he shouldn't necessarily. He's gloating about getting all this money for this ballroom, which it's just who even cares about a ballroom? This is like literal bread and circus nonsense. Who cares about a ballroom? You're saying that the country is on the brink of collapse. You're saying there's an insurrection going on in the country right now, but you've got the time to focus on a ballroom. It's like we're just meant to expect. We're just meant to think that this guy's just god tier level to where this is just how it goes. No, it's deliberate. It's purposeful. This ballroom is nonsense. I saw this conspiracy theory that they're working on a bunker underneath or updating a bunker, and that very well may be. I would think that that is more likely than he just wants to build a ballroom while there's an insurrection going on in his mind. Like, in his mind, there's definitely insurrection going on in his mind. That's for sure. But it's just total nonsense to gloat about being able to raise all this money and talk about how the taxpayer's not paying for it, but then immediately in the same week turn around and demand, you're filing for $230 million in damages against the Department of Justice for their investigations into you. And it's just, in reality, I'd have to say, given the fact that this guy's such a grifter, none of that matters. Right? I'm not. It's the same logic that they have. I'm not going to worry too much about this dude getting investigated by the DOJ when he's an authoritarian lunatic. The same way that these guys don't care that the state clobbers Democrats because they think that the Democrats are Marxists who want to kill their family and whatnot. So, I guess the only thing I can say is just like, I don't advocate any of that. But watching you guys destroy yourselves, though quite worrisome, I can't have too much sympathy for you because that happening to you is a result of your own belief system just as much as any Democrat, right? So anyway, but there's just a juxtaposition there between gloating about voluntarism, basically voluntary contributions. Nobody has to pay. The taxpayer doesn't have to pay for this expense, but the taxpayer is going to be meant to pay for the inconvenience that the DOJ put me through because it's not going to come out of the paychecks of, I mean, theoretically roundabout it will come out of all their paychecks, but what's that really matter when there's millions of them and they're stealing $4 trillion every year? So it's not going to come out of any of the people who actually conducted those investigations paychecks. Maybe they'll go to jail. Highly unlikely. I highly doubt anybody is going to go to jail that he claims, other than these poor bastards on the street. That's probably the only people that'll go through jail throughout this entire thing. In regards to all the other things I was saying, lack of transparency, increase of militarization and military language, that's another thing too. He's outright calling for the arrest of his political opponents for opposing him in what he says saving the country. He breaks no law. So It really, at that point, when a man, when a person says that, he who saves the country breaks no law, you got to understand it doesn't really matter at all what he does at that point. He will think he's justified. I mean, he basically just said so. I mean, that's what that statement said was basically, no matter what I do, I cannot possibly break a law because I'm saving the country. So it really doesn't matter even if the Democrat was justified, like, because there's lots of things where the Democrats will say, and it's complete nonsense, where it's just like, both of you guys are fools, and you're making Trump look better in a sense because you're like denying that there's a crime problem and things like this, which is you shouldn't deny reality to try to make your argument. Obviously, the thing that none of them talk about is the gun laws, of course. None of them are like, hey, these gun laws are kind of crazy. Maybe you scale back on the gun laws so people can protect themselves. Trump doesn't even talk about that because he doesn't care about that. But they're making Trump look better to the statists anyway by denying that there's an issue and by denying that they don't do anything in all this. And then that gives them, in their minds, justification to, because, so when they lump that together with Trump's mentality of he who saves the country breaks no law, even the valid criticisms that would come out of a guy's mouth from the so-called Democrats are going to be swept aside, and that's kind of the whole point of that, right? But by his own logic, he can't possibly break the law because whatever he's doing in his mind and in this mythology that they've created for their movement is saving the country. So, yeah, very, very dangerous rhetoric. I suppose I'll leave this one at that. The first week in review, planning on many more. I'm really trying to grow the Liberty Chronicle. Trying to put out as much as I can on that to try to spread the message of liberty and the philosophy of liberty. Because definitely some concerning trends taking shape over the last several years, and they seem to be on hyperdrive right now. So thanks for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share. Like I said, I'm trying to get the Liberty Chronicle out there. I'm trying to put another voice for freedom out there if we can. All right, thanks very much.